Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports, joins us. We moved you back because of a great young man at West Point. Dan, I'm sorry.
Yeah, keep talking to him. What are you doing talking to me?
he's
I got nothing. I got absolutely nothing.
No, he's off to save the world, so we're good.
Yeah, he's a little busy. 1 in a million. There's 380 million Americans. You think there's 380 of them? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. So you got to increase your number here.
What a great story with the Army and Navy unbeaten top 25, huh?
I mean, it's awesome. It's like the service academies are almost everyone's second favorite team, right? It's just great to see them both doing well. And, whether they're winning or losing, I know personally, like there's no way you could have more admiration for a college student than anyone who's at our service academy. And if you've ever been lucky enough to either attend the Army-Navy game, or I would say almost equally different, but attend a game at West Point, at Annapolis, or Colorado Springs, but particularly West Point and Annapolis, it is such a unbelievable opportunity and experience to see those campuses, the cadets, the way everybody, the midshipmen, the way they come into the field, just the whole scene. I just highly, highly recommend anybody with the opportunity, if you happen to find yourself up in New York for a weekend or something, or in the Baltimore, D.C. area, hey, you know what? They're playing. Let's go over to a game. I don't care who they're playing, especially if they're on campus. Just a fantastic deal. And then they're both winning just creates this incredible possibilities of the season. It's just, can you imagine one of these teams in the playoff?
Yep.
Well, Dan, I remember, when they were talking about the scheduling and all of that, like what do you do with Army-Navy weekend? What if one of them could be in the playoff and they're going to keep at the same spot, but 1 year into this thing where we're faced with a realistic scenario where one of them could be in the playoff and then lose the next week and it not affect them.
Yeah, it's wild. So a couple scenarios. I don't know if you already went over this, but if they both finish out 1-2 in the American Athletic Conference, the AAC, they could meet in the conference championship game, which would be 1 week before the Army-Navy game, right? Mm-hmm. So you could have them meet 2 weeks in a row. Fascinatingly, the AAC championship game is played at the campus of the higher seed. So I don't know if it's the first time ever. It's probably not. But the first time in a very long time, you would have either Army visiting Navy in Annapolis or Navy visiting Army in West Point. And they normally always play at a neutral site, usually somewhere on the East Coast. I think they're in Landover this year, just outside D.C. They play in Baltimore, up in Boston, MetLife. That's usually where they play these games. And you could have them play on each other's campus, which alone would be an unbelievable situation. And then you could have 2 straight weeks of Army-Navy. And people are like, well, how would that affect the game? Wouldn't affect it at all. They try to win. Have you ever seen Army-Navy play football? Everything would go into every single of those games. And then, of course, yes, you could win the AAC, lose the next week, but then come back a third week and be the 12th seed in a playoff maybe and play a playoff game, which, talk about America's underdog. So all of that, you got to have a lot happen. Both these guys got to play Notre Dame still. It's really hard to win every game, but the fact that it's the middle of October and Army and Navy are doing so well, I just think is fantastic.
Dan, we talk a lot of Big 12 based on where we are, who we cover, and all of that, and it's been a wild league as kind of anticipated. BYU, Iowa State, Texas Tech as well, although they're not fully unbeaten, but unbeaten in conference. What have been just sort of your takeaways, your impressions, maybe surprises from what you've seen out of a league that, everybody might have 3 losses on their heads by the end of this thing?
Yeah, we knew it would be a free-for-all because this league just is sort of very even in terms of institutional might or resources. So, yeah, the teams you just mentioned, Utah, no, let me look. Iowa State was predicted to finish 6th in the league, okay?
Yeah.
Texas Tech 9th.
Okay.
BYU 13th.
Yep.
And Arizona State 16.
Sounds like my poll, yeah.
Yeah. Those 4 are 1, 2, 3, 4. Colorado's still in there. They only have one conference loss, and they kind of open. Kansas State's still in this thing. Arizona State's up at Cincinnati this weekend. That I think they have one. I don't know. It is a total free for all. This week's a little different. Most weeks you look at the point spreads and they're like the NFL. Everything's 2.5, 3.5, maybe 4 points. Everything's tight. You don't know what's going to happen. The games are competitive, and it's really, really fun. And I love the BYU program. I love that Arizona State's popping, Iowa State's. Anything can happen week in, week out. So I know it's not maybe the best in your region, your area this year, but it's a super fun league, and I think teams can rebound quickly. Next year could be a completely different shuffle of this deck, and it's just sort of it's kind of how a conference should be, which is anybody can win it year in, year out, opposed to there's a couple anchor programs and they sort of dominate, which is how it's traditionally been. I think it's a lot more fun, at least, to have everyone go, hey, man, we can win. And not only can we win, but this year you're sitting there saying one of us is going to the playoff. And that's a pretty exciting thing. You're not just going, boy, if Iowa State can run the table, it's really hard to go 13-0. It can happen. You can get in. TCU did it a couple of years ago, made the title game. But for the most part, it's very hard to get into that 4-team playoff. Now you got a guaranteed spot, maybe 2. Maybe you can get 2 teams in, depending how it all shakes out. But I think it's really exciting and fun for the Big 12 on the field.
It's interesting Craig brought that up. I actually, when I do the preseason poll, put it up on Twitter, the station does, our group, and it came up today as a reminder just to make me feel like an idiot, because last year I had West Virginia finishing last, and they made a 9-4 run. I had BYU 15 and Arizona State 16.
There you go.
So next year, whoever I pick in that role, they can make a run at the Big 12 title. It's crazy. It really, really is. Dan, have you ever had an AP Top 25 vote?
No. It's too important. I'm not a good voter. I'm not.
In line with that,
too much, man. Yeah.
In line with that, there's kind of an argument going on this week about BYU being at 14th despite being 6-0, despite having a couple of pretty impressive wins, blowing out K-State, going on the road, beating SMU. Do you get too plussed about polls at this point in time, especially with the playoff? I'm not sure how to really take polls midway through the season, but do you think there's an argument there, and do you think that argument really matters at this stage?
I think one of BYU's problem is it's coming from so far back. No one was expecting anything out of them. But I do agree they should probably be higher. I'd have to look at exactly who you bump down. That's at this stage of the game, some of this is going to sort out. You're going to have some 2-loss teams this weekend, things like that are probably above them. And it doesn't really matter because they have a path. In the past, it mattered. But right now, if BYU wins all their games, they can be the national champion. And that wasn't the case for most of the history of college football. And so whatever they're ranked, we'll see. Can they get to, they've got a path. So we'll see where they're at the end. I think it'll be interesting whether the Big 12 can get 2 bids. That'll certainly require, look, if BYU and Iowa State, they don't play each other, almost certain, reach the conference championship game, they're both undefeated. Yeah, maybe they both get in. I think people about BYU, and I'm guilty of this year too, it was a little bit of a transition last year, but they're a tough football team. They've always been a tough football program. Kalani Sitake I don't know if you've ever met him, but he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Very personable, people person. But he was a tough player at BYU, and his program is tough. And you look at that defense, and it plays like Kalani Sitake's kind of attitude, and he's really got a program there. He's been there long enough, and much like Kyle Whittingham at Utah, you know what you're getting out of BYU. And last year wasn't it, but this is kind of what you're going to see. They're just difficult to deal with. So should they be ranked higher? I don't know, probably, but the polls just aren't as important as they used to be. It's about you've got a path and you can win. College football used to be the only sport where you could win all your games and not win the national championship. And that stunk for a long time.
I absolutely did.
Yeah, we have Kalani Sitake. He's a frequent guest on the
Yeah.
show. We love Kalani Sitake.
Yeah.
He's awesome. Dan, going back to when you were talking about the Big 12 about how different teams could win it, teams can rise and fall. Now, it'll be a slower burn in the SEC and Big 10, but look, we saw FSU 13-0, now they're 1-5. With now free agency, can we expect to see more frequency in the first to worst and worst to first kind of football that maybe we see more in the NFL?
Yeah, I think FSU is sort of the proof of like you live by the portal and you can die by the portal. You got to hit on those guys. And last year they did, and this year they didn't. And it's a struggle. I also think, when NIL came in and then the transfer portal, I thought I was on the show and everyone say, oh, it's going to be the rich getting richer and all that. I didn't know how the sport could get more imbalanced because we used to go into seasons 5-6 years ago and go, well, Alabama, Clemson, and maybe Alabama and LSU could win the title this year. That's pretty much it. And they'd be like Notre Dame would get in the playoff and lose by 40 points, or maybe Ohio State. There wasn't a lot. You had to have top 5 recruiting classes for 4 years in a row to be able to win a title. And that's no longer the case. There's a good 15 teams, 12 teams, maybe 10 teams that could win the national title, something like that. I think you could reasonably say can win this. What I wasn't expecting was 11 to 40 is also gotten significantly flatter of a balance. And so you look at a team like Vanderbilt, they didn't just bring in a quarterback out of New Mexico State. They brought in 3 veteran offensive linemen and a bunch of other guys. They had 51 new players on their team this year at Vanderbilt. And when they beat Alabama, they didn't do it by a fluke. They had the ball 42 minutes and 18 seconds. They dominated physically and controlled the ball against Alabama. And so Vanderbilt's not built to win it all, but on any week basis, the gap between an Alabama and a Vanderbilt is much closer. And Alabama and Georgia, they can't keep the depth they once had because these kids are going, I don't want to be third string. I'll go over here and play. I'm only here for 4 years. I only have a few years of eligibility. And I'm going to make some money and go play at this place. So I think there's so much more competitive balance at that top level that any given week, different teams can pop up. And so you're looking now and you're like, man, Indiana got good overnight, right? Pitt rebuilt themselves. We said Vanderbilt, other teams that have just done it. And then you look and go, man, where's Florida State? Where's this team? Where's that team that aren't getting it done? So I think anything can happen at that. It will definitely be a slow burn. You don't just topple a Texas or something like that. You still got to build up, or Ohio State's going to be good. But there's more danger in losing games during the year to just about anybody, or at least having competitive games than I think we've had in a long time.
Do you have an issue with rules changing in the middle of a season in light of Oregon and Ohio State?
Yeah, I'm torn on this. I do out of principle, but I look at that rule and I wonder if we got into this weekend, because I was talking to some coaches this week and they're like, especially at the end of the half, you could really just muck up drives and would this just totally change the way the sport's played? All of a sudden everyone starts trying to run clock by putting too many players in the field. You could put 20 guys out there, not just 12. Oregon just put one extra out, just had one extra. I don't even think he did it on purpose. I think it just happened. He's kind of claiming that he's a genius. I'm kind of like Dan. Everyone's like, Dan Lanning, you're a genius. He's like, well, yeah, I'd take it too, right? I would just be like, yeah, definitely, But he's not even saying that. But you could put 20 guys out in the field, and then they'd have to. It just would change the way the game's played. So I think I'm all right with it in this instance. But generally speaking, no. If you can exploit a rule, exploit the rule. So I don't know. I'm torn on it. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, I mean, if he really did that, God bless him. It makes him look better. I don't know. It's brilliant. But at the same time, I can't wait. I can't let you go until I hear what you think. We had We have R.J. Choppy, who's part of 105.3 The Fan, coming up next on Jerry's meltdown on radio yesterday and the Cowboys in what appears to be a very, very tenuous situation.
Yeah, I think you guys, obviously, and anybody who's been around the Cowboys, Jerry Jones has always been such a personable guy. And, there's no owner in the NFL that talks to the media more. Every game he makes himself available, talks to the media, no matter how bad the loss. There is no other owner in the sport that would have come down after losing by 40 points or whatever that was and talk to the media. And I think him lashing out is very uncharacteristic. And him making kind of a power move, I'm going to fire you, that kind of thing. It's very un-Jerry Jones. And I think it's more of a tell on how stressful and frustrated he is. Because that's not the Jerry Jones that I've known and I've covered, not on a weekly basis, but I've covered a lot of Cowboy games the last couple decades.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just always been just a really nice guy and a respectful, just a better than any other owner I've ever met in terms of just taking time for people and being polite and in some really tough losses. It's one thing for those guys to stand around after the Super Bowl and take all the credit, but when you get killed by Detroit like that, most of those guys are gone, and he's down there talking to him. So I think it shows his frustration right now, and he should be frustrated.
Craig, you have one more for Dan on college football?
Yeah, Georgia, Texas this weekend. Mighty huge game for the SEC, for both programs, and for the entire country to take in this weekend. What's your level of excitement, anticipation, and just your thoughts on that matchup in general?
Yeah, very excited. Obviously, I think it's going to be a incredible game, tons of talent, and a really big game. Texas can put themselves in the driver's seat here in the SEC to at least get to Atlanta. It also has that chance of setting up the mega game against A&M. Just anything that increases the excitement for that, I'm all for. And it's a big game for Georgia. I mean, you lose two, say, they can still get in the playoff. They can, but they're going to be like a 10 seed. They kind of got to win out, and they're not going to host a game. They're not going to get a bye. They're going to be on the road. There's a lot there for Georgia. So it's there's a lot at stake. It's going to be I would expect a very highly competitive game. And look, this is why they went to the SEC, right? They wanted this kind of excitement, this kind of weekend, this kind of home environment, having teams like that come into Austin when traditionally they played their biggest game up in Dallas, not getting that on campus. So I think it should be a great weekend for the Longhorns, and it's a huge, interesting game for both teams.
Dan, thank you. As always, appreciate your access. Dan,
anytime, guys.
Thank you. Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports, with us on 365 Sports.